The 2020 NFL Draft was the strangest draft in recent memory, possibly the strangest draft ever. Not because of who got picked and where, but because of the circumstances it was held under. But it's now been 5 full seasons since that draft. Every player has had time to play out their entire rookie contracts, even the first rounders with a 5th-year option. So how did everybody do? Well, in this series, we're going to figure out just that. We're going to go division by division, and we're going to evaluate the 2020 NFL Draft. Not just the first round, but the entire thing. First up, the AFC North. A real quick aside though, I think it's necessary to go over our grading scale. Each pick is going to be worth a maximum of 10 points. Each player will be given a grade of 1 to 10, and those will be tallied up and divided by the amount of possible points the team could have gotten. Draft position will be weighed in when evaluating these players. For example, a top 10 pick who just hangs around the league as a role player or a mid-grade starter will be graded a lot harsher than a 7th rounder who does the same thing. This will more accurately reflect the value of where somebody is picked. But what if a team trades a pick? Well, we have a scale for that. We will use a trade modifier that scales a trade from +3 to -3. +3 being it propelled the franchise and turned everything around, and -3 being it set the team back several years and then everything in between. Once we have those modifiers tallied up, we'll just add that to their overall draft grade. As far as the overall grades go, we are going to be grading on a curve. The reason for this is the best GMs in NFL history might have consistently hit on 70% of their picks. So the best draft classes in NFL history, by using a traditional grading method, would be a C plus at best, which makes no goddamn sense. What we're going to be doing instead is we're going to be curving it. A 50% is going to be a C, a 70% is going to be an A, a 30% is going to be complete and utter failure, and by God, why does that guy have a job? And hopefully we're going to find who had the best draft of the 2020 NFL Draft, and hopefully the worst, so we can clown on him a little bit. Now, obviously, when doing player evals, there is a level of subjectivity that comes into it. I might value a 6th rounder who carves out a 4-year role as a special teams ace a little bit differently than somebody else, and that's fine. Now that we have all of that out of the way, let's get right into the AFC North. First up is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the first thing you're going to notice about this draft with the Steelers is they do not have a first rounder. And the reason for that is because they traded it to the Dolphins to acquire safety Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now, as far as moves go, I don't think this is quite the level of franchise altering, but Minkah Fitzpatrick is really, really good. For the trade modifier, we're going to give that a 2. Off the rip, the Steelers are starting with a +2. The first pick that the Steelers would have in this draft was in the 2nd round at pick number 49, where they took wide receiver Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame. He had a promising rookie year. He had 873 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. That's a great rookie year for a wide receiver. If you're a Steelers fan at that time, you're probably thinking, hey, we just got our number 1 wide receiver for at least the next 4 or 5 years. He had 860 yards and 2 touchdowns in his sophomore year. So a little bit lower on the touchdown totals, but the receiving yards were pretty similar. It is worth noting that these 2 years were the last 2 years of Ben Roethlisberger. There was that big moment where the clock was running. It was under 2 minutes against the Vikings, and he was sitting there celebrating getting a first down instead of spotting the ball. Regardless of if that was overblown or not, is not a good look. In 2022, he wasn't putting up the numbers anymore. He was becoming kind of a problem. They got a 2nd round pick from the Chicago Bears, and they turned that into cornerback Joey Porter Jr. We're actually going to add a point on the trade modifiers. We're going to give them +1, so now they're at +3 total in the trade modifier category because they maximize their value. Now, as far as a pick grade goes, I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. In the 3rd round at pick 102, the Steelers selected Alex Highsmith out of Charlotte. He's a linebacker. He had a fantastic 2022 season. He had 14.5 sacks. And he had a league-leading 5 forced. Since then, he hasn't quite had the same production. He's had some injury issues, especially for a late 3rd rounder. I gotta give this a solid 8 out of 10. I mean, if you're looking at towards the end of the 3rd round and you're looking for a linebacker, there's not a whole lot better you can do. The Steelers did have a couple of these 4th rounders. Pick number 124, they drafted running back Anthony McFarland Jr. His profile was incredibly athletic, quick, twitchy. His athleticism was exciting, but the problem was he was not on the field a lot. He played in 17 games over the course of 4 seasons. Even in the 4th round, even if you're drafting a running back who's like a rotational guy, you want a guy that will consistently be available. Now, obviously injuries do happen. Injury luck sucked. For this pick, I gave it 2 out of 10. I typically want to reserve 1 out of 10s for picks that actually like set the franchise back or cause so many problems they're not even worth the pick to what could have been. Later on in the 4th round, at pick number 135, they picked up Louisiana guard Kevin Dotson. In 3 years, he did start 30 games, including all 17 games in 2022. When healthy, he played pretty decent, but there is some inconsistencies and he had a lot of injury issues. The overall profile on him with the Steelers was he's a really great run blocker, but he's kind of inconsistent when it comes to pass blocking for linemen, especially when they're coming into the league those first couple years. That's a pretty common profile for these guys. Pass blocking, just by its definition, is a lot more technical than run blocking, but they did trade him to the Rams for inconsistent performance. Details of that trade, it hasn't really come to fruition yet, so I really can't grade it and put a modifier on it. As far as the Steelers' value, they didn't get all they could out of him, and part of the reason they got rid of him was that injury history. This is another case of just an unfortunate, missed opportunity. They drafted a good player in the 4th round, but they didn't quite get all the value they could have. I'm going to give this a solid 5 out of 10. Moving on to the 6th round at pick number 198, they drafted safety Antoine Brooks Jr. out of Maryland. He only played 1 season and 4 games in Pittsburgh. He was waived with an injury designation and went to the Rams. As far as this goes, I know he had injuries, which is unfortunate, but the Steelers got really nothing out of a 6th round pick. With 6 rounders, where I would look for on the high end is a guy that sticks around for 3 or 4 years and plays a solid amount of special team snaps. That's where I think that's a solid 5-6 is where I would expect for them. They just didn't get that. They got a season out of him. This is a 2 out of 10. And in the 7th round with their final pick at pick number 232, they got Nebraska defensive tackle Carlos Davis. He played 3 seasons with the Steelers and 12 games. He was okay. He was a solid rotational guy. I don't hate this pick. In the 7th rounder, it's pretty solid if you can get a guy who's rotational, just a backup you can plug in. As far as a rating on this pick goes, I gotta give it a 4 out of 10. Not terrible, not great, just teetering on average. It's kind of what you want out of a 7th rounder. So what about an overall draft grade for the team? Now, with just the players, they get a 26 out of 60. However, we do have those trade modifiers, which do add 3 total points in value. So we are looking at a 29 out of 60, which is a 48%, which on our curve lands the Pittsburgh Steelers solidly in C- category. And, overall, this was a rough draft for Pittsburgh. This grade does get saved pretty heavily by that Minkah Fitzpatrick trade. It's tough, too, because even then, this draft is inflated by those trades as far as the value they actually got. I can't even say they did a really good job drafting backups and role players. It just didn't happen. Injuries took those away. So this was a rough draft for Pittsburgh. The one gem is Alex Highsmith. That kind of saves this draft for them. Moving on, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, if you are a Bengals fan, this is definitely a memorable draft for you, starting with their 1st round selection, which at 1st overall, they drafted LSU quarterback Joe Burrow. I don't think a whole lot needs to be said about Joe Burrow. He is a consistent top 4, top 5 quarterback in the league, if not a little bit higher. It's funny how many times teams mess up when they have a 1st overall selection, and that just sets them back for at least 2 or 3 seasons afterwards. But the Bengals nailed this. Joe Burrow was a pretty can't miss prospect. I mean, just watch some of his LSU tape. He's insane. This is a 10 out of 10. 1st overall pick. It is hard, if not impossible, to do better than getting Joe Burrow. And moving on to the 2nd round, they drafted Clemson wide receiver T. Higgins, 33rd overall. He just signed a massive extension with them. He's the best wide receiver 2 in the league. On most teams, he would be a wide receiver 1, no question. Now, he does have a little bit of an injury history where he does pretty consistently miss a couple games. As far as in the second round, you get your wide receiver 2 who really could easily be a wide receiver 1. I have this rated as an 8 out of 10. If it weren't for some of the nagging injuries that he's had over his career, I might put this as like a 9. Either way, this is a great pickup. And at picks number 65 in the third round, they got Wyoming linebacker Logan Wilson. Now, I might watch a little bit more Bengals football than your average non-Bengals fan just because I'm a fan of a division rival. But for my money, he is an underrated linebacker. I'd put him in the top 10, probably around that 7 or 8 position. In the third round, that's a pretty good steal. Same with like what the Steelers got with Alex Highsmith, right? You got a really good, really solid linebacker in the third round. I also am giving this an 8. I mean, yes, last year the Bengals defense struggled. I'm not putting that on Logan Wilson necessarily. I'm putting that on a lot of other things. At pick number 107 in the fourth round, they got Akeem Davis Gaither out of Appalachian State, linebacker. Akeem Davis Gaither is one of those guys who you need on your roster if you're going to be successful. Injuries do happen. Your backups are going to see playing time. It is an inevitability, just like death and taxes. He is a really solid backup in 2024, where he did have to step in quite a bit. He did have 82 tackles. Not the flashiest player, not the best player, but we're talking about the fourth round here. He's a really solid backup. He actually signed a 2-year, $12 million deal with the Cardinals, who, by God, need linebacker help any way you look at it. So it makes a lot of sense that he got picked up. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. Now, in the fifth round at pick number 147, we have Notre Dame defensive end Khalid Kareem. As far as his career goes, he did show some flashes. He was injured a lot, so he didn't really get to ever make a lasting impact. He played 7 games in 2021. In 2022, he was waived by the Bengals with an injury designation. I'm giving this a 4. And in the sixth round at pick number 180, the Bengals select Kansas tackle Hakeem Adeniji. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is really unfortunate for him because he did end up for a period of time starting every playoff game that the Bengals were a part of. And the Bengals offensive line during this period was bad. There's really no other way to say it. So that's not a position you want your 6th round rookie or 6th round second year tackle. And generally in the 6th round, a really solid pickup for a tackle is some guy that develops into a solid 6th lineman, maybe a swing tackle, something like that. You don't want him starting playoff games. That's just very, very seldomly will a guy drafted that position do well. He started the Super Bowl at right tackle. That's not what you want. He played poorly, but what do you expect? How hard can you knock a 6th round tackle for playing poorly in the biggest game on the planet? It's gonna happen. With him, you did get some versatility. He did shift from left tackle to right guard. And after he left the Bengals, after 2022, he did bounce around with Minnesota and Cleveland on their practice squad. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10, I think, for the versatility that he gave, being able to switch to guard and tackle, and that's hard to do. A lot of people, when they're thinking about NFL linemen, are like, oh, well, why can't he just move? That's very, very difficult to do. So props for the versatility he brought and just being a guy that could step in. Performance aside, it's a 6th rounder. I can't grade him as harshly as I would even like a 3rd rounder. He gets a 5 out of 10. And in the 7th round at pick number 215, we get linebacker Marcus Bailey out of Purdue. He played 4 years primarily as a special teamer in Cincinnati, which is what you like out of your 7th rounders. He did have to start 3 games in 2021 where he was okay. For Marcus Bailey, I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10. He's a 7th rounder. He came in, he did what a 7th rounder is supposed to do, contributed on special teams, played all 4 years, was a depth piece and a special teams player for 4 years on his rookie contract. So for the Bengals, we are getting an overall team grade of 46 out of 70, which is 66%. Which puts them really solidly in A- category. This was an insane draft by the Bengals. They knocked it out of the park. Their first 3 picks were huge pieces. If you're an NFL GM, this is the draft you want to have. Obviously you could have done a little bit better at certain areas, but as far as like what is realistic and what is possible, this is the draft that you want. So good job, Bengals. Next up, we have the Cleveland Steamers. Oh wait, no, that says Cleveland Browns. And in the first round, the Cleveland Browns selected Alabama tackle Jedrick Willis Jr. Now, he did have a knee injury in 2023. He tore his MCL, and then that kind of caused problems. Got benched for DeJuan Jones after that. He said he quote unquote made a business decision, which makes a lot of sense for these big guys. You know, if you're not 100%, especially on like a knee, especially one that you just tore your MCL on and re-injured, sitting out a game, you kind of got to do it, because especially at tackle, you are not bringing value to yourself or the team if your knees are bad. Like, that's just, you can't play that position at that weight doing what you need to do there. So I don't fault him for that, but apparently the Cleveland Browns did, because they did bench him for DeJuan Jones, and he got moved to their swing tackle position, which, first of all, it should not be in the discussion for a first round, not a top 10 pick, especially at tackle. That shouldn't be something that can happen. So immediately that kind of tells you a little bit of what you need to know about what the Browns thought of his performance up to that point. Overall, his performance has been inconsistent. To make it worse, 3-time Pro Bowler Tristan Wirfs was drafted 3 spots later, which is just a little bit of extra salt into the wound. That doesn't really affect my grade that much, but ouch. You can't have a top 10 pick not be a franchise cornerstone for 5+ seasons afterwards. It just can't happen. You can't build a successful roster or a successful draft class off of that. And his future with the Browns right now is very up in the air. For this, I'm giving this pick a 4 out of 10. Second round, at pick number 44, they drafted safety Grant Delpit out of LSU. He's primarily a strong safety. Now, he did get moved to free safety a little bit, where he struggled a little bit, but also so did the entire Browns defense. So you can't put that all on him. He is a prototypical strong safety. He should be playing there. He started 52 out of 61 games over 4 years. He did miss his rookie season with an Achilles tear, which is unfortunate, but he bounced back from it. He's a key starter on their defense. Really, for a second rounder, this is what you want out of a safety. I'm giving this pick a 7 out of 10. I think if it weren't for some of the struggles he's had, he'd be a little bit higher, maybe an 8. At pick number 88 in the third round, they drafted Texas defensive tackle Jordan Elliott, and he started 35 games over 4 seasons with Cleveland, so he got a really solid amount of starting time. So generally speaking, in Cleveland during his time, he was a high-end backup rotational guy. Out of a third rounder, I think that's a little bit closer to the floor of what you would want. In the third round, you're really hoping for somebody that can develop into a consistent starter long term. Maybe not a superstar, but at least a consistent starter. I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. I don't think it was a terrible pick, but I also think at that draft position, you want a little bit more. Later on in that same third round, at pick number 97, they grabbed LSU linebacker Jordan Phillips. He made 8 starts in 3 years in Cleveland. Just an unfortunate injury history. He suffered a torn pec in 2022, and in 2023 he had a very similar injury in the preseason, and then he got waived from the Browns. He bounced around on Houston and Indy's practice squad a little bit. When he was healthy, he did show some flashes, and it's really tough with these injuries. Like I've said before, if not for the injuries, this might have been a 4 or 5, but given that, putting that into consideration, I'm giving this pick a 3 out of 10. Moving on to the 4th round, the Browns selected tight end Harrison Bryant out of Florida Atlantic University. Now, he did play 4 seasons in Cleveland, all behind David Njoku, which is kind of tough for a 4th round tight end. You're sitting behind David Njoku. You're really not going to get as many opportunities as you might have elsewhere. But his first 3 seasons are all nearly identical, somewhere around 230 receiving yards, somewhere around 25 receptions, and a few touchdowns. Really, where this pick kind of takes a hit for Cleveland is he was never really a great run blocker. If you're drafting a tight end in the 4th round, and you have David Njoku on your roster, chances are you're expecting him to be the second guy in a lot of 2 tight end sets, which generally means he needs to be a good run blocker. For what they got out of him, like, he's not a bad player. He did go to the Raiders and he had some injury problems. He only played a few games for them, but I don't think he's a bad player. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. In the 5th round, Washington center Nick Harris, and I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. This would be a little bit higher potentially if not for injuries. In 2022, he was actually in contention for the Browns starting center job, and then he suffered a season-ending injury in the preseason. In 2024, in free agency, he actually signed with the Seahawks, and then in that same offseason in the preseason got traded back to Cleveland. So cool beans, I guess. When he's healthy, I really think he's a quality 6th O lineman. I think he's probably one of the better 6th O linemen in the league. There's that game in Pittsburgh where I think it was Jerome Ford. He lined up as a fullback for Jerome Ford to get into the end zone. So that's kind of cool. That's some versatility right there. Injury history does knock him down just a smidge, but I'm going to call this a solid 6 out of 10. And with their last pick in the 2020 draft, the Browns selected at pick number 187 in the 6th round, Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver out of Michigan. Now, in 2022, he had 839 receiving yards, a few touchdowns, and that's great for a 6th rounder. That's great. That's great production for a 6th rounder. That is, you knocked it out of the park. But after that, he was traded to Detroit in 23. The Browns had a lot of quarterback issues. Donovan Peoples-Jones was never going to get used as much as he was the year before, and he was traded for a 2025 6th rounder. So we really can't evaluate that trade yet, as the 2025 draft hasn't happened. So we don't know what kind of value they're going to get out of that trade, but they essentially traded him for peanuts while they were working out some issues in their quarterback room. The Cleveland Browns official merch store should just have a figuring out quarterback issues t-shirt. It seems like they're always doing that. Donovan Peoples-Jones, Michigan, for what they got out of him in the 6th round, I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. I almost would have given him an 8 if he would have stuck around a little bit and had a little bit more of that consistent production. So for the overall team draft grade for the Cleveland Browns, we're getting a 36 out of a potential 70, which is a 51%, which lands them very solidly at a C. Now, with this Browns draft, and this seems to be a theme with them, they did pretty good drafting role players and depth pieces, but where they just really struggled was the earlier rounds, getting franchise cornerstones in those early rounds to get really consistently build a roster. But as far as the depth pieces go, they did a pretty good job. And last but not least, we have the Baltimore Ravens. Now, obviously, if you look behind me, I am a Ravens fan, doing my best to be as objective as possible. And that's also part of why I decided to do the AFC North first. I wanted to get the division that I would have the most potential bias, either towards or against, out of the way first. The Ravens had a lot of draft picks in this draft. That's going to be the first thing you notice. I think they had 10 of them. But let's get started in the first round with the 28th overall pick, linebacker Patrick Queen out of LSU. The story of Patrick Queen in Baltimore is really struggled as a Mike linebacker or as your middle linebacker, number one, your starter, up until they picked up Roquan Smith, and he could be more of the second linebacker, play more of a will role, move around a little bit more freely. A lot of his mistakes seem to be with where he ended up, assignment based. It was never a question of physical talent. And when he would show flashes, it was, it was great. Really, hey, that's the guy, there's our first rounder. But then it just wasn't ever consistent. Once the Ravens picked up Roquan Smith in 2023, that gave Patrick Queen more of a will linebacker role. And he was a Pro Bowler and a second team All-Pro. So they didn't get nothing for that late first rounder, but the Ravens didn't pick up his 5th-year option. He ended up going to the Steelers, where it was a lot of the same. I'm grading this a 6 out of 10. If this were an earlier pick, like if this were a top 10 or an even top 15 selection, this would be a 4. And in the second round at pick number 55, the Ravens picked up Ohio State running back J.K. Dobbins. Now, his best season was his rookie season, where he had 805 yards and 9 touchdowns, which was a really great rookie running back season. He missed all of 2021. He missed half of 2022, and he missed just about all of 2023 with different injuries. Now, when he was healthy, he was electric, but he was almost never healthy. Massive what if for Ravens fans. As far as value goes, if he was healthy and putting up the numbers we know he can put up without injuries, this would be a 7 out of 10 pick. Maybe even an 8 out of 10. So I just cut what I could have put him at in half because of the injuries, and I'm giving this pick a 4 out of 10. In the third round at pick number 71, the Ravens drafted defensive tackle Nnamdi Madubuike out of Texas A&M. Now, he did take a little bit of time to develop. He was a regular role player and rotational guy, but really what happened is in 2023, he blew up. He had a second team All-Pro. He turned into a dominant defensive tackle. 2023 and 2024, he was a Pro Bowler both years, and he signed a 4-year, $98 million contract extension. He is the Ravens anchor in the middle of that defensive line. For that, I am giving this pick a 9 out of 10. Later in that same third round, I think the Ravens had like 4 third rounders here. It's kind of ridiculous. Is wide receiver Devin Duvernay out of Texas. His best receiving season was in 2022, where he had 407 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, but his value didn't come as a receiver at all. It came as special teams. As a returner in 2021, he made a first team All-Pro as a return man. He had some electric plays there. I specifically remember the one against Kansas City. He's really, for a receiver, a rotational guy, which in the third round is fine when you pair that next to his special teams value, and he also hit 2 Pro Bowls as a returner. So for this, I'm giving that a 7 out of 10. At pick number 98, just a few picks later in the third round, Ohio State linebacker Malik Harrison, and he started 34 games in 5 seasons. Nothing really crazy on him. He was a really solid depth player, and he played a lot on special teams. Really good special teamer, really good rotational depth guy. This is pretty late in that third round, so this is pretty much almost a 4th round pick. I'm giving this a 6 just for the special teams value, bumps that up. If it were just on where he was as a player when starting, I think this would be a 4 or a 5, but because of that special teams value, we are bumping this up to a 6 out of 10. And later in that third round, pick 106, Tyree Phillips out of Mississippi State, tackle. Not good. He had one really cool play against Jacksonville. He really struggled hard as a starter. He was never consistent. He was kind of a turnstile back there. The Ravens did try to trade him, just ended up cutting him, couldn't get anything out of him. As a rotational guy, okay, but you don't want him starting. And in the third round, I'm giving that a 3 out of 10. In the 4th round at pick number 143 is Ben Bredesen, Michigan guard. Now you're going to know him as a really, really good lineman on the Buccaneers. But as far as the value the Ravens got out of him, they traded him in 2021. He was unlikely to make the roster. He got traded along with a couple picks, and the Ravens in return got the Giants 2024 4th round pick, which was used to draft Daniel Faalele. As far as the value goes for Bredesen, what the Ravens got out of him as the player, I'm gonna give that a 3 out of 10. However, because of that trade, Faalele has played a key role, and he's been solid, not fantastic, but solid. We're going to give a +1 in the trade modifier. In the 5th round at pick number 170, the Ravens picked up Broderick Washington Jr., a defensive tackle out of Texas Tech. Very solid rotational and depth piece. Fantastic against the run. He just eats up blocks. Given his draft position, he did earn a 2nd contract in Baltimore, and it was really funny seeing that announced, and then everybody who was not a Ravens fan going, who the hell is this guy? I would say this is a 6 out of 10. In the 5th round, a really solid depth piece is about what you want. And in the 6th round at pick number 201, SMU wide receiver James Prochet. James Prochet was that guy who is always, every team has him, those preseason favorites who makes plays in preseason, then is kind of a bubble guy on the roster, maybe a special teamer. You know, when things are going poorly, everybody's calling for that guy, but when that guy ends up getting playing time, nothing really happens. Some solid special teams value. He got waived at the end of the of 2023. He didn't bring as much special teams value as you would want for a bubble bottom of the depth chart wide receiver. So even as a 6th rounder, I got this as a 4 out of 10. And with their final pick in the 2020 NFL draft, the Ravens picked up safety Geno Stone out of Iowa. So for most of his time in Baltimore, he was kind of a rotational depth guy. He had a breakout 2023 season with 7 interceptions as a starting safety. He was a crucial part of that insane 2023 Ravens defense. I am putting this as an 8 out of 10. So with that, with the Ravens 2020 draft, they get a total team draft grade of 57 out of 100. They had 10 picks, so 100 possible points, and that 57% with our sliding scale puts them in solid B- territory. That's gonna close out our AFC North report card, and let's see where everybody stacked up. So for the AFC North, obviously at the top was the Bengals with that A- draft, just a really great draft out of Cincinnati. Second comes the Baltimore Ravens at a 57% or a B-. Then third comes the Browns at that 51% C, and then the Steelers, who had that C- draft. And of course, if you liked this video, or you are interested to see where your team shakes out in the future, please consider hitting that like button or maybe even subscribing, and I will catch y'all later.